So, how do you handle conflict when the stakes are, well, life and death? Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're breaking down a text that's about 2,000 years old, but not as a religious lesson. Think of it more like a masterclass in communication strategy during a super high-pressure interrogation. This is all based on a really sharp analysis by Pastor Chris Myers. Okay, let's dive right in.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to set the scene with this really powerful study in contrast. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the interrogation itself, and from there, we're going to pull out 3 timeless, actionable lessons. How to figure out what the real battle is, how to declare the truth when you're under immense pressure, and finally, how to depend on the bigger plan. All right, to really get what's happening in the main event, the source material first shows us these 2 figures who are both facing pressure. And believe me, their responses could not be more different. You know, it's fascinating. The text deliberately puts these 2 moments right next to each other. On one side, you've got Peter. His loyalty just completely crumbles under some pretty low-stakes questioning from a servant girl. And then, right after that, you see Jesus. He's facing the most powerful guy in the entire region. The stakes are as high as they get, and yet, he shows total and complete composure. It's this jarring contrast that really sets the stage perfectly for what's about to happen. This contrast leads us right into the heart of our case study, because what comes next, well, it wasn't a conversation. It was an interrogation. And as we're about to see, it wasn't even a legitimate legal proceeding. It was a trap, plain and simple. So who exactly is this guy asking the questions? Annas. Now, Annas wasn't just some random official. The source material paints a picture of him as the head of this powerful priestly dynasty. He was appointed by Rome, he was incredibly rich, and he was the real power behind the throne. I mean, even though his son-in-law was technically the official high priest, everybody knew Annas was the one pulling all the strings. Just being questioned by him would have been terrifying.
And here is the absolute crucial point. This whole hearing was totally illegitimate from the jump. This wasn't a search for the truth. According to the legal standards of the day, the ones the high priest was sworn to uphold, this whole process was corrupt to its core.
The setup was completely flawed in 3 major ways. First, no witnesses were ever called to bring a charge, which was a legal requirement. You had to have that. Second, Annas basically tried to get Jesus to incriminate himself, which was another huge violation. And third, the whole thing was held at night. That was strictly forbidden for capital cases, and for good reason, to prevent rushed bad judgments. This wasn't a trial, it was a show trial. So how does Jesus respond to this trap? He doesn't even answer the question he's asked about his teachings. Instead, he just flips the entire script. He challenges the process itself. He points out how illegitimate it is by basically saying, hey, you're doing this all wrong. If you want evidence, go find some witnesses like the law actually requires. And this right here brings us to our first really powerful lesson in communication that we can pull from this. If you want to navigate conflict well, you first have to discern what the real battle is about. In pretty much any difficult conversation, this is the most important question you can ask yourself. What's the motive behind the words? What is the other person really trying to do here? Right, so according to the analysis, Annas wasn't looking for information. He already knew what Jesus taught. He was looking for a soundbite, a gotcha moment. It's a lot like a tense congressional hearing we might see today. He was just laying a trap, and discerning that motive is the absolute key to not walking right into it.
So you can see these 2 completely different strategies at play. Annas's goal is to bait him into saying something wrong, but Jesus's strategy is to just refuse the bait and instead expose how shady and illegal the trap itself is. He refuses to fight on Annas's terms. He completely changes the battleground to one of principle and law.
But what happens when the verbal traps don't work and the conflict escalates? Well, that leads us right into our second lesson, how to declare the truth by responding with principle, not with passion. So Annas's strategy is totally failing, and his authority is being challenged right to his face. So one of the officers standing there just escalates the whole situation with physical violence. He strikes Jesus. And the critical part here is that Annas, the man in charge, just lets it happen. And this is the climax of the whole encounter. After being physically hit, Jesus doesn't lash out in anger, and he doesn't shrink back in fear. He responds with this calm, unshakable logic. He just says, if I said something wrong, prove it. But if I said something right, why did you hit me? It's such a compelling question, isn't it, for all of us? When a discussion just breaks down, when someone tries to replace facts with intimidation or force, how do you keep your composure and actually respond effectively?
And here is the key. He calmly appeals to the principle of justice. He puts the burden of proof squarely back on his accusers, forcing them to justify their actions, which, of course, they can't. He declares the truth not by shouting louder, but by simply standing on it.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most challenging lesson from this whole encounter: depending on the plan. And really, it's about letting go of the need to control the immediate outcome.
At this point, Annas has just completely outmaneuvered. His trap failed, the violence backfired, and his illegal process has been totally exposed. He has no response to Jesus' logical challenge. So what's he do? He just ends the interrogation and sends Jesus away. He basically concedes that he's completely lost control of the situation. This really gets at a common feeling in these high-stakes conflicts, that feeling of powerlessness, right? What happens when you've done everything right, you've said the right thing, you've stood on principle, but you still can't dictate what happens next?
So this is the playbook that the analysis leaves us with, a really clear 3-step framework. First, discern the battle. You have to understand what's really going on. Second, declare the truth. Stand firmly on what's right. And third, depend on the plan. And this is the hard part. Accept that you can't control everything and just trust the larger process.
And this brings us to the final, really crucial insight. The analysis concludes that Jesus wasn't trying to win the argument with Annas. He knew that was impossible. His goal was something different. He was operating from a place of trust in a much, much larger plan, where this moment was just a single necessary step. So we'll just leave you with this one final thought to chew on. The next time you find yourself in a really difficult, high-stakes situation, ask yourself, is my goal just to win this one argument? Or is it to stand with integrity for what is true, no matter what the immediate outcome is?